The sound that came from behind the abandoned gas station was something that would haunt Lieutenant Commander Elena Vasquez for the rest of her life. Not because it was the worst thing she had ever heard, but because it was the moment she understood that the war she had been fighting overseas had followed her home. The German Shepherd was tied to the back of a rusted pickup truck with a frayed rope, its claws scraping desperately against the cracked asphalt as three men laughed and revved the engine, dragging the animal in slow, cruel circles while recording it on their phones. The dog's cries were raw and guttural, the sound of something that had already given up on being saved. Elena was driving past on a two-lane highway in rural Virginia, still wearing her Navy fatigues, still carrying the weight of 14 years of active duty on her shoulders, still trying to remember what it felt like to be a civilian. She pulled over. She stepped out of her truck. And in the next 45 seconds, she did something that would land her face on every news channel in America, divide public opinion down the middle, and force the military to answer a question it had been avoiding for years. When a warrior comes home, where does the battlefield end? Some people called her a hero that day. Others called her a liability. The Department of Defense called her a problem. But before you decide what she was, you need to understand who she was, how she got there, and why a woman who had defused bombs in Fallujah and rescued hostages in the mountains of Afghanistan decided that saving one broken dog on a forgotten highway was the hill she was willing to die on. What would you have done if you heard that sound? Elena Maria Vasquez was born in 1984 in a small border town in southern Texas where the summers could melt the soles off your shoes and the winters never got cold enough to kill the scorpions. Her father, Miguel, was a mechanic who had served 2 tours in Vietnam and never talked about either one. Her mother, Rosa, cleaned houses for wealthy families on the north side of town and made sure Elena and her 2 younger brothers had clean uniforms for school every single morning without exception. They were not a family that complained. They were a family that endured. Elena learned early that silence was a form of strength in the Vasquez household. Her father communicated through work, through the clang of wrenches, the growl of engines, through hands that were permanently stained with oil. He never told Elena he loved her with words. He told her by teaching her how to change a tire at age 9, how to check oil at 10, how to throw a punch at 11. When the boys at school pushed her into the dirt during recess, he did not march to the principal's office. He knelt in front of her, looked her in the eyes, and said, "Next time, you get up faster than you went down." She carried that sentence with her for the rest of her life, like a tattoo etched on the inside of her ribs. Elena was not a natural student, but she was relentless. She stayed after school in the library when other kids went home to watch television. She ran track, not because she loved running, but because she loved the discipline of it. The way her body could be trained to obey her mind, even when every cell screamed for her to stop. By her junior year of high school, she had a 3.8 GPA and a regional record in the 800 meters. The Navy recruiter who visited her school that spring saw something in her that went beyond athleticism. He saw composure. He saw a young woman who listened more than she spoke, who observed more than she reacted, and who carried herself with a kind of controlled intensity that most people twice her age had never developed. She enlisted at 18, the day after graduation, with her mother crying at the kitchen table and her father standing silently on the porch, watching the recruiter's car pull away. Rosa begged her not to go. Miguel said nothing. But when Elena looked back through the rear window, she saw her father raise one hand, not waving, just holding it there, steady and open, like he was pressing his palm against an invisible wall between the life she was leaving and the one she was about to enter. She would not see him again for 2 years. By then, she would be a different person entirely. Boot camp at Great Lakes was where Elena discovered that the discipline her father had built into her was not a burden, but a weapon. While other recruits broke down during Hell Week, while grown men wept into their pillows at 2 in the morning, Elena lay still in her rack and stared at the ceiling and repeated her father's words in her mind. "Get up faster than you went down." She graduated first in her class. The Navy did not hand Elena anything. Every rank she earned came with a fight, sometimes literal, sometimes bureaucratic, and sometimes both at once. She was one of only 3 women in her initial explosive ordnance disposal training pipeline, and by the end of the first phase, she was the only one remaining. The attrition rate for EOD school was brutal regardless of gender. Nearly 70% of candidates washed out. But for women, the pressure was compounded by a culture that had not yet fully accepted their presence. Instructors did not lower standards for her, and she never asked them to. She completed every evolution, every timed run, every underwater exercise with the same stoic determination that had carried her through childhood. When a senior petty officer told her during pool week that she did not belong there, she said nothing. She simply completed the drill faster than anyone else in the class and walked away without looking back. Her first deployment came in 2005 to Iraq's Al-Anbar province, where improvised explosive devices were killing and maiming American service members at a rate that made the nightly news unbearable for families back home. Elena's job was to find those devices before they found her. She learned to read the ground the way a surgeon reads an X-ray. Every displaced pebble, every freshly turned patch of earth, every wire that did not belong. She disarmed her first IED on a Tuesday morning in Ramadi while a squad of Marines watched from behind a concrete barrier. Her hands did not shake. Her breathing stayed even. When she walked back to the convoy afterward, a young corporal looked at her and said, "Ma'am, I don't know if you're brave or crazy." She replied, "Both. And it's lieutenant." Over the next decade, Elena deployed 7 times, 4 to Iraq, 2 to Afghanistan, and 1 classified rotation that she was never permitted to discuss. She rose through the ranks with a quiet ferocity that earned her both respect and resentment. There were men who admired her competence and men who despised her for it. She learned to distinguish between the two quickly and to waste no energy on the latter. In Afghanistan, during her 5th deployment, she was attached to a joint special operations task force that included Navy SEALs, Army Rangers, and intelligence operatives working in the mountainous border regions near Pakistan. It was there that she earned the Bronze Star with valor for crawling 200 meters under sporadic enemy fire to disarm a daisy-chain series of explosive devices that had pinned down a 12-man SEAL team in a narrow valley. The team leader, a senior chief named Marcus Cole, told her afterward that she had saved every life in that valley. He shook her hand and said, "I owe you one." She filed that moment away without ceremony, the way she filed away every moment of violence and valor, in a compartment deep inside her mind where things were stored but never fully processed. Coming home was always harder than going to war. Elena had known this intellectually for years, had sat through the mandatory reintegration briefings and the transition assistance programs and the pamphlets about post-traumatic stress that were handed out like fast food menus at the end of every deployment cycle. But knowing something and living it were entirely different experiences. After her 7th deployment, she returned to Virginia Beach with a duffel bag, a rental car, and a silence inside her chest that felt less like peace and more like something had been removed. The world she came back to was loud in all the wrong ways and quiet in all the wrong places. Grocery stores overwhelmed her. The fluorescent lights, the music, the sheer abundance of everything. It pressed against her skull like a migraine she could not medicate. She found herself scanning rooftops when she drove through town, checking the shoulders of highways for disturbed soil, listening for sounds that did not belong. She had been awarded a Navy Commendation Medal, 2 additional Bronze Stars, and a promotion to lieutenant commander that placed her among the most decorated female EOD technicians in the history of the United States Navy. None of it mattered at 3 in the morning when she woke up drenched in sweat with her heart hammering against her sternum and her hands reaching for a weapon that was not there. She did not tell anyone. She did not seek help. She handled it the way she handled everything. Alone, silently, with her teeth clenched and her father's voice echoing in her skull. Get up faster than you went down. But this time, she was not sure she had actually gotten up at all. The isolation crept in like water through a crack in a foundation, slow, steady, and destructive in ways that were invisible until the damage was done. She stopped calling her mother. She stopped returning texts from friends who had served with her. She adopted a routine that revolved around running, cleaning her apartment, and sitting in her truck in parking lots for hours, watching people live their lives as if the world were not constantly on the verge of detonation. She was not suicidal. She was not broken in any dramatic, cinematic way. She was simply disconnected, like a wire that had come loose from its terminal, still carrying current, but no longer completing the circuit. It was during one of these parking lot sessions, on a scorching July afternoon, that she decided to drive. No destination, no plan, just movement. She headed west on Route 460, then south on a series of back roads that took her through forgotten towns with boarded-up storefronts and overgrown lots. She was looking for nothing. She was running from everything. And then she heard the dog. The gas station had been closed for years, its pumps removed, its windows shattered, its lot overtaken by weeds pushing through fractured concrete. The pickup truck was parked behind the building, partially hidden from the road, and the three men standing around it were in their 20s, sunburned, loud, and holding beer cans that caught the afternoon light. The German Shepherd was a male, probably around 4 years old, severely underweight, with patches of fur missing from its hindquarters where the rope had worn the skin raw. It was lying on its side, panting rapidly, its eyes glassy and unfocused, and one of the men was nudging it with his boot while another held up a phone, filming and laughing. The third man was behind the wheel of the truck, his arm hanging out the window, ready to drive another loop. Elena pulled her truck to the side of the road and sat for exactly 7 seconds. In those 7 seconds, her training took over. Not the emotional response that most people would have felt, not rage or horror or impulsive fury, but a cold, clinical assessment of the situation. 3 males, early 20s, intoxicated, no visible weapons beyond a tire iron leaning against the truck bed. 1 vehicle, engine running. 1 animal in distress, possibly in shock. 1 exit route from the lot, partially blocked by her own vehicle. She stepped out. She did not yell. She did not announce herself. She walked toward them with the measured, unhurried stride of someone who had walked toward far more dangerous things and survived. The first man to notice her was the one with the phone. He lowered it slightly and squinted at her, taking in the fatigues, the boots, the insignia. "Help you with something?" he asked, smirking. Elena stopped 10 feet from the dog and looked at it, then at the rope, then at the man behind the wheel. "Cut the rope," she said. Her voice was flat and even, carrying the same tone she had used to issue commands under fire. The man with the phone laughed. "Lady, this ain't your business. Keep driving." She did not keep driving. She took 3 steps forward, knelt beside the dog, and began untying the rope from its neck with steady, practiced hands. The dog flinched at her touch, but did not snap. It looked up at her with an expression that she would later describe as recognition, not of her specifically, but of the concept that someone, finally, was not going to hurt it. The man with the tire iron moved first. He picked it up and took a step toward her, telling her to get away from his property. What happened next took less than 15 seconds. Elena stood, turned, and closed the distance between them before he could raise the iron above his waist. She executed a joint lock that her combatives instructor at JSOC would have been proud of, stripped the tire iron from his grip, and put him on the ground with a controlled takedown that dislocated nothing and broke nothing, but removed every ounce of fight from his body. The second man dropped his phone and ran. The third man stayed in the truck and locked the doors. Elena picked up the dog, carried it to her vehicle, and placed it carefully on the back seat. Then she called 911. The aftermath unfolded in the way that modern America processes all of its conflicts, loudly, publicly, and without nuance. Bystander footage from a passing car captured the final moments of the confrontation, and within 48 hours, the video had been viewed over 12 million times. The headlines were polarized. Some called Elena a vigilante who had assaulted a civilian. Others called her a hero who had intervened where the law had failed. Animal rights organizations rallied behind her. Civil liberties groups raised concerns about military personnel using combatives training on civilians. The 3 men were arrested and charged with felony animal cruelty, but their attorney filed a countersuit alleging assault, claiming that Elena had used excessive force against unarmed individuals. The Navy found itself in an uncomfortable position. Lieutenant Commander Vasquez was a decorated officer with an impeccable service record, but the optics of a uniformed service member physically engaging civilians, regardless of the circumstances, presented a public affairs challenge that no amount of spin could easily resolve. She was placed on administrative leave pending an investigation. Her commanding officer, a captain who had served with her in Afghanistan, told her privately that he supported her, but that his hands were tied by regulations and political pressure. Elena understood. She had spent her entire career navigating systems that were designed to function on paperwork and precedent, not on moral clarity. During the investigation, Marcus Cole, the SEAL senior chief whose team she had saved in Afghanistan, appeared on a national news broadcast and told the story of what Elena had done in that valley. He described in precise, unflinching detail how she had crawled through open terrain under enemy fire to reach the explosives that had trapped his men, how she had worked for 47 minutes with bullets impacting the rocks around her, and how she had walked back to the extraction point afterward without a single tremor in her hands. "This woman saved 12 lives that day," he said, looking directly into the camera. "And last week, she saved one more. If the Navy punishes her for that, then the Navy has lost its way." The interview went viral. Public opinion shifted decisively in Elena's favor. The countersuit was dropped when the three men's criminal records, which included prior animal cruelty charges and a domestic violence conviction, became public. The investigation concluded with a formal letter of caution in Elena's file, a bureaucratic slap on the wrist that satisfied the regulatory requirements without destroying her career. But the real transformation happened outside the headlines. The German Shepherd, which Elena named Atlas, had been examined by a veterinarian who determined that he had sustained rope burns, dehydration, malnutrition, and deep tissue bruising, but no permanent skeletal or organ damage. With treatment, he would recover fully. Elena took him home to her apartment in Virginia Beach and, for the first time in months, found herself waking up with a reason to move through the day that had nothing to do with duty or discipline. Atlas needed to be fed. Atlas needed to be walked. Atlas needed to learn that not every hand that reached for him intended harm. In caring for the dog's recovery, Elena began, without fully realizing it, to care for her own. The months that followed were not cinematic. There was no single breakthrough moment, no dramatic scene where Elena collapsed in tears and emerged healed. Recovery, she learned, was not an event but a process, slow, repetitive, and unglamorous, like physical therapy for a wound that no one could see. She began attending a support group for veterans struggling with post-traumatic stress, something she had resisted for years because she had always equated seeking help with admitting weakness. The group met every Thursday evening in the basement of a church near the oceanfront, and it was there that Elena heard stories from men and women who had carried the same silence she carried, who had built the same walls, who had mistaken isolation for independence. She spoke for the first time during her fourth session. She told them about the parking lots, about the rooftop scanning, about the grocery stores that felt like hostile territory. She told them about her father's words and how they had sustained her through combat, but had become a prison in peacetime. Because getting up faster than you went down only works if you acknowledge that you went down in the first place. The room was quiet when she finished. Then a retired Army sergeant across the circle nodded slowly and said, "Yeah, that's it. That's exactly it." It was the most understood she had felt in years. Atlas became a central part of her healing in ways that no therapist could have prescribed. The dog, once terrified of human contact, began to trust her with a loyalty that was absolute and uncomplicated. He slept at the foot of her bed and woke her gently when her nightmares started, pressing his nose against her hand until her breathing steadied. She trained him using the same patience and consistency that the Navy had taught her. And he responded with an intelligence and devotion that reminded her why she had spent her career protecting things that could not protect themselves. She eventually enrolled him in a service dog certification program, and within a year, Atlas was officially recognized as a psychiatric service animal. Elena returned to active duty 6 months after the incident, this time in a training command role where she mentored young EOD candidates, many of them women, who were entering the pipeline with the same determination and the same doubts she had carried 20 years earlier. She taught them technical skills, but more importantly, she taught them that strength is not the absence of damage. It is the willingness to function within it, to adapt, to ask for help when the mission exceeds your capacity, and to extend that help to others when you see them struggling. She told them about Atlas. She told them about the valley in Afghanistan. She told them about the parking lots and the silence. And she told them the truth that her father's words had never quite captured, that sometimes getting up is not something you do alone. Lieutenant Commander Elena Vasquez's story does not end with a medal ceremony or a Hollywood sunset. It ends the way most real stories end, in the quiet, unremarkable moments that follow the noise. It ends with a woman driving to work on a Monday morning with a German shepherd riding shotgun, his head out the window, his ears flattened by the wind, completely unaware that he was once dragged behind a truck by men who saw him as entertainment. It ends with a classroom full of young sailors listening to an officer who has seen the worst of what human beings can do to each other and to the helpless, and who chose, every single time, to stand between the two. Elena's journey was never about being the toughest person in the room. It was about understanding that true strength lives in the space between endurance and vulnerability, between the discipline to keep going and the courage to admit that you cannot keep going alone. She learned that lesson not in a combat zone, but in a church basement, surrounded by people who had fought the same invisible war and were brave enough to say so out loud. Her father taught her to get up faster than she went down. The Navy taught her to lead under fire. But it was a broken dog on a forgotten highway that taught her the most important lesson of all, that saving something else is sometimes the only way to save yourself. Atlas is 7 years old now. He still flinches when strangers move too quickly. He still presses his nose against Elena's hand at 3 in the morning when her breathing changes. And every day, they get up together, not faster than they went down, but steady and sure and no longer alone. That is not weakness. That is the strongest thing a warrior can do.